We're on to the keynote 7 with Mrs. BOGATAJ. So let us transition the stage. And let us welcome Ms. Marie BOGATAJ. She's head of the AXA Research Fund and Foresight. She'll be joining us remotely from Paris. Sorry for the wait.
Hello,
The floor is
morning,
yours.
good afternoon. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be with you today at this Visions for 2050. And I've just heard about the shifting business models and the radical business disruptions. And what I will talk to you about is extremely related to that. It's a tool for better interpreting an increasingly complex world and potentially impacting these models and informing them. So the next slide, please. Our world is really a world of acceleration. We're entering a world of increased speed. And in fact, according to Ray Kurzweil, that you might have heard of, he's an American inventor and futurist, the rate of progress in the 21st century will be equivalent to 20,000 years of progress at today's rate of progress. This was written in 2003. I think he's been very much spot on. This is most obvious in technology. Moore's law, that states that the speed of power in microchips doubles every 24 months has been going on now for 50 years with a huge impact on our lives. But this exponential growth is not only reserved to the technological field, it's happening in globalization, it's happening in the sharing of information, and it's indeed also happening in climate change. All of these are non-linear accelerations that we're seeing over time. And this non-linearity means that we need more resilience and adaptability, and definitely our organizations have to redefine themselves faster and faster. And maybe they need to redefine themselves in different ways. Next slide, please. This acceleration is accompanied by more uncertainty. There was somewhat of a readability in the past in world events, and the impact and unpreparedness which the world has received in the most recent years depicts higher unpredictability in every aspect of the world around us, whether it's politics, environmental change, biological events. So we went from Francis Fukuyama's The End of History to the events on 9/11. We went from real trust in European institutions in the EU to Brexit. We went from a sure win for Hillary Clinton to the election of Donald Trump, and then from literature on the end of illness to the current pandemic with COVID-19. In fact, even in trends that have been discussed since the 1970s, such as climate change, we see accelerated signs of change and a difficulty to assess an unpredictability in the change among the inside climate change itself. Next slide, please. So at the same time as accelerated pace of change and increased unpredictability, our era also shows higher complexity and definitely much more interconnectedness than ever before. I think the current COVID crisis is the perfect case in point of this. We expected a once-in-a-century pandemic, and we focused, if we did, on the health systems overload. But what happened was a chain effect, or a series of chain effects, that was so fast and violent that it created even more complexity and illustrated this interconnectedness. So, you know, it went from worldwide business interruption, as we all know, to supply chain disruption, to increased intra and interstate inequalities, and, you know, the list goes on. So clearly, our organizations and societies and the individuals that make them up are operating in a terribly complex and challenging environment. Next slide, please. So this means that we're in a different context, and our organizations need to be better prepared for the unexpected. They actually need to be future-proof. We like that term as Foresight people. They need to be more forward-looking and focus on better anticipation of changes that could emerge in the future. And these changes, remember, are now non-linear. And we need to build scenarios that allow to stress test existing and proposed strategies and policies. So how do we really do that? And what are the key questions for organizations? I suggest that some of them would be, what are the alternative futures? How likely are they to unfold? And what are the strategies and the innovations I need to develop each case for my organization to achieve these goals? And those questions are exactly what Foresight aims to address. Next slide, please. So actually, we might say, what is strategic foresight exactly? It's a hazy notion, and it sounds really cool, and it's all about the future. But what is it? First of all, what is it not? Foresight is not forecast. It is not about extrapolation of existing trends. It is more about the identification of shifting points. And that's why it's so related to the previous talk about shifting paradigms in business. Forecasting attempts to create a single correct vision of the future, and it is based on evidence and probability. What Foresight does, it uses multiple alternative futures based on their usefulness in developing robust future-ready strategy. What Foresight is not also, it's not strategic planning. In fact, if you only did Foresight, you would not end up with a strategic plan at all. What strategic foresight instead aims to do is to pose the key questions that might have gone unasked in developing the strategy, and to reveal and challenge the assumptions that we have built into the current plans. But what foresight is a structured and systematic method that looks beyond expected trends to better assess uncertainty and complexity by exploring different futures and designing this information to inform decisions and inform them now to help us act in the present according to these futures. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? How do we actually do foresight? So foresight is a combination of tools. It's a mix between qualitative and quantitative ones, and it draws upon 4 areas. Creativity, which comes in with imagination, with gurus, really, creative gurus, and can even go until science fiction. Science fiction actually informs foresight quite a lot. Evidence-based input, which could be forecasts also. Definitely expertise, so interviews and interventions with individuals from a specific area, and interaction, so challenging all of the hypotheses and ideas with people from other areas, and why not the general public. And in the middle of that diamond, and I know it's a bit small, there are all of the techniques that are used to actually come up with those futures, and you might recognize some of the terms there, which are mapping, SWOT analysis, forecasting, and the whole array of those tools. So all those brought together combine into creating those different futures. Next slide, please. There's a key point about strategic foresight. As I said before, if you did strategic foresight, you wouldn't end up with a strategic plan. But more than that, strategic foresight needs to live within an ecosystem. It's not useful in a standalone form. It's only effective and efficient if it works alongside and in support of other strategic inputs, such as trend analysis, insights, and forecasts and modeling, for instance. All of these have different timescales, and all of them draw differently on quantitative and qualitative inputs. They all have their role to play, and they differ and inform in different ways on which futures lie ahead and which are the most challenging and present the most opportunity to work with. So to illustrate this ecosystem, I turn to my next slide, and would like to show you, next slide, please. Yep, great. And I would like to talk about one of these tools, which is our trend analysis at AXA, which is our future risks report. This is a global study that measures and ranks the evolution of emerging risks as seen by a panel of risk management experts, as well as by public opinion. And it discusses the challenges of the 5 years ahead. So it points to the probable trends within the medium future, and it allows to analyze the existing gap between expert analysis and general public. This tool is extremely precious to us as it informs our emerging risk thinking and modeling and can define the orientation of our research programs. It allows us also to better understand our customers and the public. It's interesting to note, since we're talking about this emerging risk report, that the top risk this year was climate change, back up to #1 position after pandemics was last year, with cybersecurity as a #2 risk and pandemics and infectious disease as #3. Next slide, please. So that was the trend analysis tool. And here I would like to talk about the Foresight analysis tool that we developed that same year. It was the Foresight analysis report for 2040. Parallel to the trends analysis work, the Foresight analysis sets out to map plausible scenarios. And so you see the large cone is actually all the possible scenarios that then the team works to reduce to the plausible scenarios and then to the probable scenarios. And so what this report did was it focused on megatrends, choosing climate, health, technology, and the underlying role of government to examine what the evolutions in all of these four would be and what that means for our businesses and our societies. Next slide, please. So I will focus on one example coming out of the COP26. This is relevant, which is the focus on climate change. What we did in this particular megatrend is that we ratcheted down to the three most plausible futures for 2040, sorry. And you see in orange the one that we described as the most preferable, which is green growth, right? So this was then developed into a detailed scenario that aimed at informing our future strategy. And it was analyzed in terms of the challenges and the opportunities for the organization and for the industry as a whole. Next slide, please. So my message is that the Foresight activity is at the service of organizations, and it can be a powerful tool in our exponentially changing world. It helps to conceive, structure, and design, also to communicate possible future scenarios, which can then be used in developing and strengthening new strategies, initiatives, products, and services. So with that, I encourage you to future away, because it seems to me that change is not planning on slowing down anytime soon. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. BOGATAJ, for your excellent presentation. As we learned throughout the day, this world is volatile, uncertain, unpredictable, and it's accelerating. But it's good to know that there is framework which helps us to navigate and try to have a little bit more clarity that makes us prepared. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.